Saudi Arabia, number 72 out of 180 countries on the World Press Freedom Index. Saudi Arabia wasn't always this repressive. Now it's unbearable. September 18th, 2017 by Jamal Khashoggi. When I speak of fear, intimidation, arrests, and public shaming of intellectuals and religious leaders who dare speak their minds, and then I tell you I'm from Saudi Arabia, are you surprised? With the young crown prince Mohammed bin Salman's rise to power, he promised an embrace of social and economic reform. He spoke of making our country more open and tolerant and promised that he would address the things that hold us back our progress, such as the ban on women driving, but all I see now is the recent wave of arrests. Last week, about 30 people were reportedly rounded up by authorities ahead of the crown prince's ascension to the throne. Some of the arrested are good friends of mine, and the effort represents the public shaming of intellectuals and religious leaders who dared to express opinions contrary to those of my country's leadership. The scene was quite dramatic as mass security men stormed houses with cameras, filming everything and confiscating papers, books, computers. The arrested are accused of being recipients of Qatari money and part of a grand Qatari-backed conspiracy. Several others, myself included, are in self-exile and could face arrest upon returning home. It anguishes me to speak with other Saudi friends about Istanbul and London who are also in self-exile. There are at least 7 of us who are we going to be the core of a Saudi diaspora? We spend endless hours on the phone trying to understand this wave of arrests that have included my friend, businessman, and thoughtful Twitter personality Issam al-Zamil. It was just last Thursday that he returned home from the United States, having been part of an official Saudi delegation. That is how breathtakingly fast you can fall out of favor in Saudi Arabia. It's all quite shocking, but this has not been business as usual in my country in 2003 and again in 2010. I was fired from my job as editor-in-chief of a progressive paper, Al Watan, during the years in between, and I served as a media advisor to Prince Turki Al Faisal, the Saudi ambassador to Britain and then the United States. Perhaps it seems odd to be fired by the government and then serve it abroad, yet it's truly the Saudi paradox. In the starkest terms, Saudi Arabia is trying to be moderate the extreme viewpoints of both liberal reformers and conservative clerics, and the arrests span that spectrum. Why would this climate of fear and intimidation be so prevalent when a young, charismatic leader is promising long-awaited reforms to spur economic growth and diversity of our economy? The Crown Prince is popular, and his reform plan was supported by most of the 30 clerics, writers, and social media superstars who were rounded up in the middle of the night. In recent months, Saudi Arabia has instituted several new and extreme policies, from full-throated opposition of Islamists to encouraging citizens to name others to a government blacklist. Those arrested were on that list. Columnists close to the Saudi leadership repeatedly demanded that Islamicists be eradicated. And it's no secret that the Crown Prince despises the Muslim Brotherhood, yet it's actually a strange contradiction to the identity of the person as a Muslim Brotherhood activist. I always found it ironic when a Saudi official bashes Islamists, given that Saudi Arabia is the mother of all political Islam, and even describes itself as an Islamic state in its higher law. We avoid the term constitution because it's a secular interpretation, and often say that the Quran is our constitution. Regardless of who is being targeted, this is not what Saudi Arabia needs right now. We are going through a major economic transformation that's supported by the people. A transformation that regardless of who is being targeted, this is not what we are supported by that, but a transformation that will free us from total dependence on oil and restore a culture of work and production, and this is a very painful process. Mohammed bin Salman is best served by encouraging constructive, diverse opinions from Public figures such as Assam and other economists, clerks, and intellectuals and business people who have instead been swept up in these arrests. My friends and I living abroad feel helpless. We want our country to thrive, and we want to see the 2030 vision realized. We're not opposed to our government and care deeply about Saudi Arabia. It is the only home we know or want. Yet we are the enemy. Under pressure from my government, the publisher of one of the most widely read Arabic dailies, Al Hayat, canceled my column. The government banned me from Twitter when I cautioned against an overly enthusiastic embrace of then President-elect Donald Trump. So I spent 6 months silently reflecting on the state of my country and the stark choices before me. It was painful for me several years ago when several friends were arrested and I said nothing. I didn't want to lose my job or my freedom. I worried about my family. I made a different choice now. I've left my home, my family, my job, and I'm raising my voice. To do otherwise would betray those who languish in prison. I can speak when so many cannot, and I want you to know that Saudi Arabia has not always been as it is now. We Saudis deserve better. By Jamal Khashoggi. Saudi Arabia's reformers now face a terrible choice. May 2020, 2018. It is appalling to see 60 and 70-year-old icons of reform being rebranded as traitors on the front pages of Saudi newspaper. Women and men who championed many of the same social freedoms, including women driving, that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is now advancing, were arrested in Saudi Arabia last week. The crackdown has shocked even the government's most stalwart defenders, and the arrests illuminate the predicament confronting all Saudis. We are being asked to abandon any hope of political freedom and to keep quiet about arrests and travel bans that impact not only the critics, but also their families. We are expected to vigorously applaud social reforms and heap praise on the Crown Prince, while avoiding any reference to the pioneering Saudis who dared to address these issues decades ago. Last week's arrests were simply about controlling the narrative. The message is clear to all. Activism of any sort is to be within the government, and no independent voice or counter-opinion will be allowed. Everyone must stick to the party line. Is there no other way for us? Must we choose between movie theaters and our rights as citizens? To speak out, whether in support of our or critical of our government's action. Do we only voice glowing references to our leader's decisions, his visions of our future, in exchange for the right to live and travel freely? For ourselves and our wives, husbands, and children too? I've been told that I need to accept, with gratitude, the social reforms that I have long called for while keeping silent on other matters, ranging from the Yemen quagmire, hastily executed economic reforms, the blockade of Qatar, discussions about an alliance with Israel to counter Iran, last year's imprisonment of dozens of Saudi intellectuals and clerics. This is the choice I've woken up to. Each morning ever since last June, when I left Saudi Arabia for last time after being silenced by the government for 6 months, I wonder if, like me, Layjan al-Hattathal, one of the most prominent Saudi women activists who was arrested last week, has struggled with such dilemmas, or if her lawyer, Ibrahim, deals with these inner conflicts too. State security accused them and others of being involved in activities that encroach on religious and national constants. The group had suspicious contact with external parties supporting their activities and recruiting people working in sensitive government positions. In short, she complied with the government's order to be silent about her decades of work in support of women driving, and even allowed the Crown Prince alone to take the credit for lifting the driving ban. She and her associates are being punished for speaking with the foreign media tasked with covering the next months of lifting the ban and other social changes in Saudi Arabia. There's nothing remarkable about having media and a foreign embassy contacts. When I lived in Saudi Arabia as a journalist, this was a regular occurrence. It's happening even more often given the pace of government reform informed, yet now, unlike 2-3 years ago, any foreign contact that deviates from the approved script is treasonous. Yes, treasonous. That is a word that is used to publicly defame those arrested. I have never witnessed such draconian response to anything as innocuous as simply speaking with foreign journalists and officials. It does not align with good impressions of openness and reform, and the Crown Prince successfully reinforced during his recent visit to Europe and the United States. It undercuts his interviews with journalists and the off-the-record editorial board meetings with major newspapers, including the Washington Post, where he spent about 2 hours talking about his editors and his reform policies, religious fanaticism that has tarnished Saudi Arabia's image for decades and has given way to new and perhaps more pernicious fanaticism, a cult of blind loyalty to our leader. This Faustian bargain I will not make. I suspect Lujan and her associates may have felt the same way. I expect that I still wake up every morning and ponder the choice I have made to speak my mind about what is happening in Saudi Arabia. It's a pattern I have grown accustomed to. Despite the anguish it causes me, it reminds me of how much I miss my country and my home. Now, after these fresh arrests and the public humiliation of these individuals, my doubts are greatly diminished. The social reforms are so important to Saudi Arabia cannot come at the expense of the public space once available for us to have discussion and debate. Repression and intimidation are not and should never be the acceptable companions of reform. What the Arab world needs most is free expression. October 18th, 2018. Jamal Khashoggi. As a result, Arabs living in these countries are either uninformed or misinformed. They are unable to adequately address, much less publicly discuss, matters that affect the region in their day-to-day lives. The state-run narrative dominates the public psyche, while many do not believe it. The large majority of the population falls victim to this false narrative. Sadly, this situation is unlikely to change, and the Arab world was ripe with hope during the spring of 2011. Journalists, academics, and the general population were brimming with expectations of a bright and free Arab society within their respective countries. They expected to be emancipated from the homogeny of their governments and the constant interventions and censorship of information. These expectations were quickly shattered. These societies either fell back into their old status quo or faced even harsher conditions than before. My dear friend, the prominent Saudi writer Salih al-Sahai, wrote one of the most famous columns ever published in the Saudi press. He unfortunately is now serving an unwarranted 5-year prison sentence for supposed comments contrary to the Saudi establishment. The Egyptian government's seizure of the entire print run of the newspaper Al-Masri Al-Yawm did not enrage or provoke a reaction from colleagues. These actions no longer carry the consequence of a backlash from the international community. Instead, these actions may trigger condemnation, quickly followed by silence. As a result, Arab governments are given free rein to continue silencing the media, and at an alarming rate. There is a time when journalists believed that the internet would liberate information from the censorship and control associated with print media. But these governments, whose very existence relies on the control of information, have aggressively blocked the internet. They have also arrested local reporters and pressured advertisers to harm the revenue of specific publications. There are few oases that continue to embody the spirit of the Arab Spring. Qatar's government continues to support international news coverage in contrast to its neighbors' efforts to uphold the control of information to support the old Arab order. Even Tunisia and Kuwait, where the press is considered at least partially free, the media focuses on domestic issues and not issues faced by the greater Arab world. They are hesitant to provide a platform for journalists from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Yemen. Even Lebanon, the Arab world's crown jewel when it comes to press freedom, has fallen victim to polarization and the influence of the pro-Iran Hezbollah. The Arab world is facing its own version of an Iron Curtain, imposed not by external actors, but through domestic forces vying for power. During the Cold War, Radio Free Europe, which grew over the years into a critical institution, played an important role in fostering and sustaining the hope of freedom. Arabs need something similar. In 1967, the New York Times and the Post took joint ownership of the International Herald Tribune newspaper, which went on to become a platform for the voices from around the world. My publication, the Post, has taken the initiative to translate many of my pieces and publish them in Arabic, and for that I'm grateful. Arabs need to read in their own language so they can understand and discuss the various aspects and complications of democracy in the United States and in the West. If an Egyptian reads an article exposing the actual costs of a construction project in Washington, then he or she would be better able to understand the implications of similar projects in his or her community. The Arab world needs a modern version of the old transnational media so citizens can be informed about global events. More important, we need to provide a platform for Arab voices. We suffer from poverty, mismanagement, and poor education, though the creation of an independent international forum, isolated from the influence of nationalist governments, spreading hate through propaganda, ordinary people in the Arab world would be able to address the structural problems their societies face.